Hello there. And there you have it. The European Union is on the wrong side of history. The Ukraine crisis could end up being the beginning of the end for the European Union, but it could also signal the end of NATO. Strong words, so why do I say them? Because right now Russia is on the verge of invading the Ukraine and overturning the entire European geopolitical landscape. And Putin won't be worrying about the diversity of his battalions or what their preferred pronouns are. And if he does take the Ukraine or even a part of it, both the EU and NATO will have failed. Failed while the West beats its chest but worries more about its economies. Russia and its oligarchs have investments around the globe, and if that all starts getting wound up, then it will hurt us too. For footy lovers, for example, the Russian energy giant Gazprom, which is mostly owned by the Russian state, sponsors the Champions League. The Russian tentacles spread far and wide, so hard sanctions against Putin could be an act of self-harm on the West, which might explain EU, French and German reticence here. So if Putin does press the go button and sends the tanks in, it will be because he has no fear of what the EU or NATO, either separately or combined, will do to his Russia, or anyone else come to that. But isn't it strange that all the attention is being placed on Russia and Putin? But what about the target, Ukraine? Ukraine is the real epicenter of this, but how many people can name its leader? Surely his face should be all over our press. And more on that aspect in a minute. Now many people think Putin may go in during the Olympics, which start next week. It provides a big distraction just when the ground in Ukraine is frozen solid, giving firm support for Putin's armour. But those Olympics are taking place in Beijing, China. And would Putin really risk upsetting China? And that's a big question. And according to UK government ministers, Russian troops are already behind the lines in Ukraine in advance of an assault. For years now, the US has been trying to get Europe, in the form of the EU, to take more responsibility for and spend more money on defence of its own theatre of operations. And why not, after all this wrong-headed talk over the years that the European Union is the route to European peace and security? Just listen to the Ramonas harping on about that. But right now, we have a European Union that, unlike the US and UK, is not taking the precaution of withdrawing embassy staff from Kiev. And guess what? That is the stance usually taken by those that intend to remain neutral in any conflict. Yes, the fence-sitters who hope not to get hurt. And to all those Ramonas out there who claim that if the UK was still in the EU it would all be different, I will remind you that Russia invaded the Ukraine and took control of the Crimea, and that was back in 2014, which was 2 years before the UK even voted to leave the EU. Then there's Germany that, despite its talk of being a friend to Ukraine, has actively prevented arms getting through to the Ukraine and is also doing all it can to not give Putin the excuse to turn off the gas supplies it so desperately needs. Germany even blocked Estonia sending its German-made weapons to the Ukraine, at the same time as Washington gave the green light for US-made arms to be sent there. And now we hear that France, which has just taken over the 6-month rotating presidency of the EU, is talking tough, but not committing troops, and has been calling for some sort of new strategic partnership between Russia and the European Union. Something that those other EU 27 member states closest to Russia in geographical terms might not be too happy about, and the US administration might be raising an eyebrow too. And we're also being told that the talk about the financially nuclear option of forcing Russia out of the SWIFT International Payments Information System have been set aside. Yes, it's all about economies and keeping the money circulating. The upshot is that the French have decided to turn tail, the Germans have chosen the more authoritarian side to be on, and the EU is getting fence splinters in its backside. And Germany and France are NATO members, so all this will also have ramifications for that defence organisation. And on top of that, President Macron of France has already said that it's nice to have the US involved, but it is now up to European countries to sort its own region out. And what this new Europe is now shaping up to become looks like a return to the days of the Cold War. So Brussels, Paris and Berlin seem to be assisting Putin with his aim of throwing the US out of Europe and carving out a new Russian-controlled region for himself. A region that now seems to encompass Germany, France and the centre of EU power in Brussels. So the EU finds itself capable of cobbling together an anti-Brexit UK political and economic stance, but it can't come to a united front when faced with a hostile nation that is doing everything but openly admitting that it is on the verge of invading the Ukraine, a country with which the EU has an association agreement. An agreement where it talks about wanting to develop dialogue and to deepen cooperation between the parties in the field of security and defence. And also to promote the principles of independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity and the inviolability of borders. Yeah. Now I know those are probably not legally binding in any way, but the EU is showing precious little in support of those grandiose statements. Now the UK does have a treaty with the Ukraine, one that came into force at the end of 2020. In fact, it was the first agreement signed by post-Brexit Britain with an emerging market economy. A political free trade and strategic partnership agreement where, in the objectives we talk about, further developing a close relationship in the field of security and defence to tackle threats to peace and stability, as well as enhancing defence cooperation with the aim of aligning Ukraine defence to NATO standards. Once again, probably not binding at all, but at least we're taking action and trying to chivvy the US and the EU along to put up a united front that could deter the Russians. Because only a united front that would hurt Russia to the point of bankruptcy would be sufficient. But nothing the EU, Germany or France are doing right now suggests that they want to go anywhere near that level of sanctions. Now the Mail does report that Denmark is sending a frigate to the Baltic Sea and is set to deploy F-16 fighter jets to Lithuania. Spain is sending ships and is considering sending fighter jets to Bulgaria. France has expressed its readiness to send troops to Romania, and the Netherlands is sending 2 F-35 fighter planes to Bulgaria from April. There's a lot of set to, considering and expressing readiness to in that paragraph, isn't there? And come April it might all be over anyway. While the US has put 8,500 troops on high alert for deployment to the region. Does any of this sound like the sort of coordinated action that would deter Putin? I must say it sounds to me like we're shuffling the deck chairs with both sides knowing that NATO troops will stay rigidly on their side of the NATO boundary and that Russian troops will stay firmly on their side of that boundary, invasion or no invasion. But one thing does puzzle me. Unless I'm looking in the wrong places, I can find nothing on the English-speaking web about President Zelensky of Ukraine urgently asking for international assistance other than for the EU to maintain a united front. While NDTV recently reported that UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said Friday that a Russian invasion of Ukraine would be against international law and said he was confident that it would not happen. And Euromaidan PR said, Ukraine needs Patriot missile batteries strategically placed across the country. And why hasn't any country called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations where the whole world would be against Russia? And also, after Biden withdrew some of his embassy staff in Kiev, President Zelensky stated that there is no imminent threat and that Americans are safer in Kiev than they are in LA. And when I googled Ukrainian troop movements, all I got was stuff about Russian troops massing on the border. Strange. So the Ukrainian president doesn't seem to be urgently calling for help in the face of an imminent invasion, and there's no real evidence of his country preparing to defend itself. Now, UK politicians love the opportunity to visit an army base and get photographed wearing a helmet atop a tank. Where's all the video footage and photos of Zelensky visiting the military emplacements and geeing his troops up? Where's all that chest-thumping, morale-boosting stuff? Although I have picked up some info from around the bazaars. Ukrainian troops have been sent to the Chernobyl nuclear accident site that could provide Putin with an entry point for his invasion. And a new National Resistance Act came into force on the 1st of January to enable the recruitment and training of more civilian reservists. But isn't that far too late to turn them into an effective defence force in time? While the Associated Press tweeted, Ukraine's front line, soldiers in trenches and civilians in eastern Ukraine are waiting with helpless anticipation to see if war comes as fears of a Russian invasion mount. So why is Zelensky doing all he can to reassure everyone that Russia poses no immediate problems for his country? How come US, UK and EU intel is pointing to an imminent invasion, but Zelensky claims there's no real problem? Now Zelensky, as the democratically elected head of his country, will surely be a prime target for capture, or worse, by Russian forces. That is to say, he is in personal jeopardy here. And his ministers too. So if this assessment of his is wrong, unless for some reason or other he doesn't fear an invasion. And all the while the Russians are now openly piling more military resources into the area. So you do have to ask what is going on. I have this nagging suspicion that we will see a swift and relatively bloodless coup with Zelensky calling for national and international calm, followed by some half-hearted sanctions with lots of talk going on at the UN, and Putin quietly preening himself in the Kremlin. While in the rest of the world, the money keeps flowing, the jittery stock exchanges settle down, and business as usual, with no bloodbath. So what's your opinion on how the Ukraine will pan out? Please like and comment below. Please subscribe and like this video, buy a mug and support me on Patreon or PayPal, and thank you for watching.